Jimi Hendrix collapsed on stage when he received the call about his mother's death. The weight of absence. The stage lights, a kaleidoscope of electric blues and fiery reds, pulsed around Jimi Hendrix, transforming him into a mythical figure. His guitar, a battered Stratocaster, wailed and screamed under his touch, a living extension of his soul. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of adoration that threatened to sweep him away. Yet, even amidst this maelstrom of sound and light, a profound loneliness often settled upon him, a familiar ache that no amount of fame or adulation could ever truly quell. It was the weight of absence, the ghost of a past he could never fully escape, embodied in the memory of his mother, Lucille. Lucille Jeter Hendrix was a woman of striking beauty, a vibrant spirit often dimmed by the shadows of her own struggles. Jimi, born Johnny Allen Hendrix, had inherited her striking features, the high cheekbones, the intense eyes, the undeniable charisma. But he had also inherited, or perhaps absorbed, the deep-seated melancholy that often accompanied her. Their relationship was a tangled knot of love, longing, and profound disappointment. Lucille had been a free spirit, too wild, perhaps, for the confines of conventional life, and certainly too fragile for the harsh realities she faced. Her battle with alcoholism had begun early, a slow, insidious erosion of her presence in Jimi's young life. He remembered flashes, her laughter, bright and infectious, echoing through their small Seattle home, the scent of her perfume, a fleeting comfort, the rare moments of tenderness when she would hold him close. But these were often overshadowed by the longer, darker stretches of her absence. She would disappear for days, sometimes weeks, leaving Jimi and his younger brother Leon in the care of relatives, or, more often, their stern, often distant father, Al. The instability was a constant companion, a gnawing uncertainty that etched itself into Jimi's psyche. He learned early to fend for himself, to find solace in his own imagination, and eventually, in the strings of a borrowed guitar. The estrangement grew with time, a chasm widening between them. As Jimi chased his musical dreams, first in the army, then on the Chitlin circuit, and finally across the Atlantic to London, Lucille remained a distant, almost spectral figure. News of her would filter through, often secondhand, tales of her continued struggles, her declining health. Each report was a fresh wound, a reminder of the mother he loved but could never truly reach, the woman who had given him life but struggled to nurture it. He sent money when he could, a futile attempt to bridge the gap with material comfort, but he knew it wasn't what she truly needed or what he truly yearned to give. On stage, this emotional burden manifested in his music. The raw, untamed blues that poured from his guitar wasn't just technical brilliance. It was the sound of a soul wrestling with its demons. The mournful bends, the searing feedback, the sudden bursts of ecstatic joy followed by a plunge into a deep, resonant sorrow. It was all there, a sonic autobiography of his pain and his yearning. He poured his heart into every note, every riff, every improvised solo, as if trying to communicate with a distant, unreachable entity. The audience saw a rock god, a psychedelic shaman, but beneath the dazzling showmanship was a man carrying the heavy weight of a mother's absence, a son forever searching for a connection that had been severed too soon, too painfully. Tonight, in the haze of a smoky arena, the feeling was particularly acute. The crowd was electric, their energy a palpable force, yet Jimi felt a strange detachment. His fingers flew across the fretboard with their usual impossible dexterity, coaxing sounds from his instrument that no one else could replicate. But his mind, even as he was lost in the music, kept drifting. He saw Lucille's face, younger, vibrant, then older, etched with the lines of hardship. He heard her voice, a faint echo from a childhood long past. The music became a prayer, a lament, a desperate plea for understanding. He was a supernova of talent, burning brighter than almost anyone, but the core of that star was still a lonely boy, yearning for the warmth of a mother's love, a warmth he had only ever known in fleeting, fragile moments. The weight of her absence was a constant companion, a silent, invisible member of his entourage, always there, always pulling at the edges of his extraordinary world. The late 1960s were a whirlwind, a cultural explosion that Jimi Hendrix didn't just witness, he ignited. The year was 1969, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience, though undergoing shifts in its lineup, was at the zenith of its power and influence. The tour was relentless, a blur of cities, hotels, soundchecks, and the deafening roar of adoring crowds. From the sun-drenched fields of Woodstock to the cavernous arenas of America's heartland, Jimi was a phenomenon, a living legend whose every performance was an event, a spiritual awakening for a generation hungry for something new, something real. The tour bus, a rolling sanctuary of sorts, rumbled through the night, carrying Jimi and his entourage from one screaming metropolis to the next. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, the scent of stale coffee, and the lingering aroma of patchouli. Jimi, often lost in thought, would gaze out the window, watching the American landscape unfurl in the moonlight. His fame had skyrocketed with dizzying speed, transforming him from an unknown sideman into the undisputed king of the electric guitar. Every magazine cover, every radio station, every conversation seemed to revolve around him. He was the voice of a generation, the psychedelic shaman, the man who could make a guitar weep, scream, and sing like no other. But with this unprecedented fame came an equally unprecedented pressure. Each night, he was expected to deliver a performance that transcended the last, to push the boundaries of music further than anyone had dared. The crowds weren't just there to listen, they were there to witness a miracle. And Jimi, ever the perfectionist, felt the weight of those expectations acutely. He spent hours backstage, meticulously tuning his guitar, experimenting with new sounds, chasing the elusive perfect tone. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of relentless practice, were his connection to the universe, his conduit for the raw, untamed energy that flowed through him. The performances themselves were an exercise in controlled chaos. Jimi would stride onto the stage, often clad in flamboyant, custom-made attire, a vision of rock and roll royalty. The first chord would hit, a seismic tremor that shook the foundations of the venue, and from that moment on, he was in another dimension. He would coax feedback into melodic lines, play with his teeth, behind his back, even set his guitar on fire, not for cheap theatrics, but as an extension of his boundless creativity, a physical manifestation of the fire within him. The music was loud, visceral, and utterly captivating, a sonic tapestry woven with threads of blues, rock, R&B, and something entirely new, something uniquely Jimi. Yet, beneath the dazzling spectacle, his internal emotional state was a complex landscape. The constant travel, the lack of sleep, the relentless demands on his time and energy, all took their toll. He was often introverted off stage, a quiet, thoughtful man who preferred the company of a few close friends to the clamor of large gatherings. The adulation, while intoxicating, also felt isolating. How could anyone truly understand the world he inhabited, the sounds that constantly echoed in his mind, the visions that danced behind his eyes? He was surrounded by people, bandmates Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, or later, Billy Cox, roadies, managers, groupies, but often felt profoundly alone. His mind frequently drifted to his past, to the struggles that had shaped him, the poverty, the racial prejudice, the constant search for belonging. And always, Lucille. Her memory was a persistent hum beneath the roar of the crowd, a quiet melody in the cacophony of his fame. He wondered if she knew of his success, if she was proud, if she was finally at peace. These thoughts would often surface during quiet moments on the bus, or late at night in anonymous hotel rooms, when the adrenaline of the performance had faded, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He would pick up his guitar, not to practice, but to simply play, to explore the depths of his own emotions through the language he knew best. The music was his therapy, his confessional, his only true constant in a world that spun ever faster around him. The tour was a triumph, a testament to his genius, but it was also a crucible, forging him in the fires of fame while simultaneously exposing the raw, vulnerable core of the man behind the legend. The air in the Oakland Coliseum was thick with anticipation, a palpable hum that vibrated through the floorboards and up into the very bones of the audience. Jimi Hendrix, bathed in the ethereal glow of the stage lights, was in the midst of a particularly searing rendition of Voodoo Child, Slight Return. His fingers danced across the fretboard, a blur of motion, coaxing sounds from his Stratocaster that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The guitar wailed, screamed, and then settled into a deep, resonant groove, a primal blues rhythm that burrowed deep into the collective consciousness of the thousands gathered before him. He was lost in the music, completely immersed in the moment, his body swaying, his head thrown back, his eyes closed in a trance-like state. The solo built, a crescendo of feedback and melodic invention, each note a brushstroke on a canvas of pure sound. The crowd was mesmerized, a sea of faces upturned, mouths agape, lost in the sheer power of his artistry. Jimi felt the energy, absorbed it, and channeled it back through his instrument, creating a feedback loop of pure, unadulterated rock and roll ecstasy. He was soaring, untouchable, riding the wave of sound he himself was creating. Then, a flicker at the edge of his vision. A figure, indistinct at first, moving purposefully towards the side of the stage. It was Jerry Stickles, his road manager, a man usually a calm, reassuring presence. But tonight, Jerry's movements were urgent, his face etched with a grim seriousness that immediately caught Jimi's attention, even through the haze of his musical trance. Jimi tried to ignore it, to push the intrusion away, to remain in the sacred space of his performance. He bent a note, holding it, letting it sustain, his eyes still closed. Jerry was closer now, practically at the edge of the stage, gesturing frantically. He held a hand to his ear, mouthing words that were lost in the thunderous roar of the music. Jimi opened his eyes, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He moved closer to the monitor, still playing, but his focus was beginning to fracture. Jerry leaned in, shouting over the din, his voice strained. "Jimi, it's a call. Urgent. Your mother, man. She's very ill. Critical." The words hit Jimi like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp jab to the gut. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The music, which had been his sanctuary, his escape, suddenly felt hollow, distant. "Mother, critical?" The words echoed in his mind, a cold, unwelcome intrusion. 1,000 memories, fragmented and raw, flashed before his eyes. Lucille's smile, her struggles, the years of estrangement, the unspoken words, the unresolved pain. His fingers faltered, just for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible hesitation in the intricate tapestry of sound. The guitar let out a brief, discordant squawk before he forced his hand to regain control. He tried to continue, to push through the sudden wave of nausea and dread that washed over him. The music became strained, almost desperate, a frantic attempt to outrun the news that had just been delivered. He closed his eyes again, not in ecstasy this time, but in a desperate plea for the moment to pass, for the words to be unsaid. The audience, caught up in the spectacle, might have noticed a subtle shift, a raw, almost pained edge to his playing, but they couldn't possibly comprehend the earthquake that had just rocked his world. He was still playing, still moving, still the iconic Jimi Hendrix, but inside, a storm was brewing. The vibrant colors of the stage lights seemed to dim, the roar of the crowd faded into a distant hum. All he could hear was Jerry's voice. "Your mother, critical." The weight of absence had suddenly become the terrifying prospect of permanent loss. He played on, but it was a hollow performance, a desperate charade, his mind already miles away, racing towards a past he had tried so hard to outrun. If you've ever felt that sudden, gut-wrenching news hit you like a physical blow, you know the feeling. Hit that like button if you can relate to the sheer force of unexpected grief. Jimi, the rock god, was just a son, grappling with the terrifying fragility of life. The music continued, a strained, almost frantic improvisation that mirrored the turmoil raging within Jimi. He was a puppet, his fingers moving across the fretboard with a mechanical precision, but the soul, the fire, had been extinguished. Each note felt like a lead weight, each chord a struggle. He could feel the eyes of the audience on him, their collective energy a heavy blanket, but he was no longer truly present. His mind was a whirlwind of what-ifs and if-onlys, a desperate replay of every missed opportunity, every unspoken word with Lucille. Jerry, ever vigilant, reappeared at the side of the stage, his face even grimmer than before. He held a hand up, signaling for Jimi's attention, his eyes wide with a terrible urgency. Jimi, mid-solo, saw him, and a cold dread seeped into his bones. He knew, instinctively, before Jerry even opened his mouth. This wasn't just an update. This was the final, devastating blow. He moved towards Jerry, his guitar still wailing, a mournful cry that seemed to anticipate the news. Jerry leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the remaining music like a knife. "Jimi, she's gone. Lucille, she passed away." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. "She's gone." The world truly crumbled. The guitar, which had been an extension of his being, suddenly felt alien, heavy, meaningless. It slipped from his grasp, falling to the stage with a dull thud, the feedback wail that followed a piercing, agonizing shriek that cut through the arena. Jimi stumbled backward, his knees buckling beneath him. He clutched his chest, as if trying to contain the sudden, unbearable pain that ripped through him. His eyes, wide and unfocused, stared blankly at the sea of faces before him, but he saw nothing. The vibrant lights blurred into an indistinct haze. The roar of the crowd, which had been his lifeblood, now sounded like a distant, mocking echo. He swayed precariously. Then, with a guttural cry that was swallowed by the sudden silence of the music, he collapsed. His body hit the stage with a sickening thud, a crumpled heap of velvet and silk. His iconic hair splayed around him like a dark halo. Chaos erupted. Mitch Mitchell and Billy Cox, stunned into silence by the abrupt cessation of music and Jimi's fall, rushed forward. Roadies and security personnel swarmed the stage, their faces a mixture of panic and confusion. The house lights flickered on, revealing the stunned faces of the audience. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of murmurs, then shouts. Some thought it was part of the show, a dramatic flourish. Others, sensing the gravity of the situation, began to scream. Medics, who had been stationed backstage, pushed their way through the throng, their emergency kits clattering. They knelt beside Jimi, checking his pulse, trying to rouse him. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow. The once vibrant stage, usually a canvas for his explosive artistry, was now a scene of stark, terrifying reality. The music had stopped. The legend had fallen. He was carefully lifted, a limp figure carried off the stage and into the frantic, hushed chaos of backstage. The audience, left in bewildered silence, slowly began to disperse, the air thick with unanswered questions and a chilling sense of unease. Backstage, the panic intensified. Doctors worked over him, while Jerry and the rest of the crew stood by, helpless, their faces etched with worry and grief. The news of Lucille's death, delivered in the most brutal way imaginable, had not just stopped the concert, it had shattered a man. The immediate aftermath was a blur of medical attention, hushed conversations, and the crushing weight of a tragedy that had unfolded in the most public of arenas. Imagine being in that crowd, witnessing such a raw, human moment from a rock god. What would your reaction have been? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jimi awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the hushed murmurs of voices. He was in a small, dimly lit room, a makeshift infirmary backstage, or perhaps a local hospital. The world felt muted, distant, as if he were observing it through a thick pane of glass. The crushing weight of grief returned, a physical ache in his chest, a hollow emptiness where his heart should have been. Lucille was gone. The finality of it was a cold, hard truth that settled deep within his bones. The immediate aftermath was a blur of cancellations, frantic phone calls, and a media frenzy that swirled around the news of his collapse. The tour, a meticulously planned juggernaut, ground to a halt. Public statements were issued, vague at first, then more specific, citing exhaustion and personal tragedy. The world speculated, but few truly understood the depth of the wound that had been inflicted. In the days and weeks that followed, Jimi retreated. He found solace in solitude, in the quiet corners of his hotel room, or in the company of a few trusted friends. He spent hours staring into space, his mind replaying fragments of his life with Lucille. He remembered her laughter, her struggles, the fleeting moments of connection, and the vast, aching expanse of their estrangement. Guilt gnawed at him. Guilt for not being there more, for not understanding her struggles better, for the unspoken words that would now forever remain unsaid. He grappled with the what-ifs. What if he had stayed in Seattle? What if he had tried harder to bridge the gap? What if he had just called more often? The answers, he knew, were irrelevant now, but the questions persisted, a relentless torment. This profound personal tragedy cast a long shadow over his career. The collapse on stage became a defining moment, a stark reminder of the human vulnerability beneath the rock god persona. Future performances, while still electrifying, carried a new, somber weight. His music, already deeply emotional, seemed to plumb even greater depths. The blues, always a foundational element of his sound, became more pronounced, more raw, infused with a palpable sense of loss and introspection. Songs he wrote or performed after this period often carried a melancholic undertone, a yearning for something lost, a reflection of the pain he carried. The incident forced Jimi to confront his own mortality, his own humanity. He was not just a performer. He was a son, a brother, a man grappling with the universal experience of grief. The public, who had seen him as an almost supernatural being, were reminded that even their idols were susceptible to the same heartbreaks that afflicted ordinary people. It added a layer of profound depth to his legend, transforming him from a mere entertainer into a tragic figure, a poet of pain and beauty. Lucille's death, and the dramatic circumstances of his learning about it, became an indelible part of his story. It was a turning point, a moment that irrevocably altered his trajectory, both personally and artistically. He carried the weight of her absence, and now, the weight of her final departure, until his own untimely end. The music he left behind, a testament to his genius, is also a testament to his profound emotional landscape, a landscape shaped by the love, loss, and longing for his mother. Even today, when we listen to the searing solos and the soulful melodies, we hear not just the sound of a guitar, but the echo of a heart that knew both immense joy and profound sorrow. If you're moved by stories of the human side of legendary figures, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the lives that shaped music history. And if this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with a fellow music lover or anyone who appreciates the complex tapestry of human emotion behind the art.